Welcome, everyone. I'm happy to see you all here. Thanks again to Natalie and Tani for that amazing music. My name is Alana Nafsager. I'm the Graduate Student Coordinator for the LAEP Speaker Series. The Speaker Series is a wonderful opportunity where we get to interact with remarkable people in and adjacent to the professions of landscape architecture and environmental planning. After my introduction, we'll hear from our speaker. Then there will be a brief Q&A, and that will be followed by refreshments upstairs in the Commons studio. If you need credit for being here, we've changed the format a little bit. You can just go ahead and scan the QR code and fill out the survey for attendance. It's open from 5 to 5:30, so hopefully that goes a little bit more smoothly. As a land-grant institution, we would like to acknowledge that the Utah State University campuses and centers reside and operate on the territories of the 8 tribes of Utah. The Logan campus is situated in the Sahivagoi or Willow Valley, the ancestral lands of the northeastern band of the Shoshone Nation, where Shoshone people have stewarded the land since time immemorial and continue to live today. We acknowledge these lands carry the stories of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. We affirm Indigenous self-governance history, experiences, and the resiliency of the Native peoples who are still here. Today, we are hearing from Professor Dave Evans. When I went to write this introduction, I first looked on the department website for Dave's bio, which is as follows. Born and raised in Ohio, where I spent my first 35 years, moved to California in 1989. Building on 37 years of professional practice, I joined the university in August of 2012. Honestly, I laughed. In this summation of his career, I saw almost no reflection of the incredible human being, designer, and teacher I've had the privilege and joy to know and learn from during my time here at USU. The thing about Dave is, he is as humble as he is accomplished. For instance, I've never once heard him brag about being the captain of his high school football team. In all seriousness, while listening to his stories about his career and life, some of which we will hear today, there's a consistent pattern of Dave's excellent and careful work being noticed and people inviting him to collaborate with them, such as when Garrett Ekbo asked him to join him on a project after seeing Dave present his site analysis work and went on to recommend him to a firm in San Francisco. It's evident to me that not only has Dave rubbed shoulders with some of the greats of landscape architecture, like Mr. Ekbo, Alan Jacobs, J.B. Jackson, and Christopher Alexander, but indeed he is a great himself. Lucky for us students, his skills reach beyond professional practice to include those crucial for teaching. Dave is able to masterfully impart his knowledge and passion, especially when it comes to the importance of loosening up and drawing from the shoulder. He enthusiastically delivers robust critiques that enrich and guide our understanding of what good design looks like. He is also a tireless student advocate, dedicating time and thoughtful intention to the quality of educational experience, mentoring graduate students, and co-leading Base Camp, which provides a gentle introduction to the complex and sometimes daunting field of landscape architecture. His influence extends far beyond the classroom as well. Not only is he still actively working, designing places to be better for people and planet alike, but his former students are practicing professionals, creating an impact themselves. And when they come back to USU, they are excited to see Dave again, and sometimes vying for another opportunity to work with him. His authentic kindness and honesty are remarkable, and we are blessed to have him here. Please join me in welcoming Professor Dave Evans.
Well, thank you, Alana. That was a very nice introduction. I appreciate it very much. And thanks, Natalie and Tawny, for getting us started with that wonderful music. Well, it's a pleasure to be here. You know, USU has been a really important part of my life for, you know, some 12 going on 13 years now. So it's been a wonderful capstone, and I feel very much a part of this wonderful community. So it's a real pleasure to share some of my professional history with you. I know many of you know me, but you may not know the journey I took to get here. So I'm going to share that journey with you, you know, in the hopes really that it might inspire students to see what the possibilities of a career in landscape architecture might look like. You know, as well as those of you who know me but don't know my professional history, to get a deeper sense of the work that I've done. All right. There we go. In 1974, well, I lived in Ohio, as Alana said, for most of the first 35 years of my life. And I still consider myself sort of a Midwesterner, and you know, my heart is still sort of in the place I grew up and spent what is almost half of my life. But in 1975, I discovered this incredible school in Massachusetts. I had studied landscape horticulture at Ohio State and was doing landscape maintenance for a 30-acre estate and really loving it. But a family member who lived in Connecticut sent me a magazine article about this revolutionary new school of landscape architecture in Massachusetts. And you know, in 1975, it was a revolutionary era. And I was young enough to have been sort of swept up in the revolutionary times of that era. So the idea of a revolutionary school had great appeal for me. So this is where I earned my first master's degree in 1976. This is the Conway School. Now, it's no longer housed in this structure. This is an old maple sugar house that is two-story. It's pitched on the side of a hill and runs down to this rushing river. So the school was always filled with the sound of rushing water. And it was a revolutionary idea. In fact, the year before I came to Conway, and I was in the 4th cohort of what now is 53 years and going strong, there was a really aggressive editorial in Landscape Architecture magazine talking about the school stealing work from practitioners. And I thought, oh, okay, this is really a controversial place. I want to be a part of that. It was sort of the sign of the times, right? But it was true to my own spirit. And the reason this editorial had been written and accusing us of stealing work from the discipline was because we were doing community-engaged work before anyone was doing community-engaged work, and we were doing it for 10 cents on the dollar. So we weren't stealing work from anyone. We were just seeing working with actual clients was key to learning, and learning rapidly. And so I walked into an environment where, you know, really my first day, I was handed a client. We all were handed residential clients to begin with, and through the course of our years at Conway, everything we did and all that we learned was built around serving actual clients. So it was a revolutionary pedagogy, but it was one that I think really worked well because today most accredited programs in landscape architecture do community engaged work, are proud of doing community engaged work. And our department, of course, is known for that. So it's an interesting linkage between an idea that was considered threatening in 1975 and now is embraced universally as an important way to learn as landscape architects. Now this is my cohort. I wonder if you can find me in that picture. That was a long time ago. We were in Mount Royal in Montreal, a Frederick Law Olmsted Park. The first 2 weeks of the program, we got in a bus and traveled. We left Massachusetts, drove up into Vermont, stopped at the office of Dan Kiley on the way, who was a friend of the instructor, or the founder of the school, Walt Kudnahusky. Walt is the gentleman in the back row, far left with the beard. Walt was a graduate of Michigan State University's landscape architecture program, and then went on to the Harvard GSD. He was a practitioner and a teacher. He had taught at UMass. And he decided he had a better idea about landscape architectural education. So he founded the Conway School, which is a bold thing to do. I mean, can you imagine deciding to start your own graduate program? One day, I mean, years later when I talked to him, he told me he made like $2,500 a year the first couple of years we were running the school. So it was not a money-making venture. But now, you know, the school has 18 students a year. We took 12 back in, he took 12 back in those days. But we traveled through Canada for 2 weeks. And Walt was an incredibly enthusiastic teacher and really inspired me to think about teaching. And I even told him one time, Walt, I want to teach like you. And, you know, it took 37 years for me to find my way here. So, you know, I would say don't give up on your dreams because they can come true. And so anyway, you know, the Conway School really is the foundation of my landscape architecture training. But I think a really important lesson is, you know, you always have to continue to learn. And so all of these various chapters of my life, a professional life that I'll present you to were efforts on my part to acquire more knowledge, to be a better landscape architect, to be a better designer. You know, I mentioned the revolutionary pedagogy that was revolutionary in those days, but is now fairly commonplace. You know, the controversiality that I also mentioned. You know, Conway really, actually the first time I even heard the word sustainable was at Conway. And so it's had a very strong sustainability focus for all the years of its history. After I graduated from Conway, I returned to Ohio. It was my home. It was where my friends were, my family. And it seemed like a really good place for me to begin my new career as a landscape architect. The first job I got when I came back to Columbus was with an interdisciplinary firm of architects, predominantly architects, planners, and landscape architects. But it was a very rich environment for me to grow and learn. You know, my drawing and design skills advanced rapidly. You know, architects I have high regard for. I mean, there's a rigor, an attention to detail, and I learned a great deal by associating with this multidisciplinary environment. You know, I learned about civic and real estate development because they did both of these types of work. So that was that was sort of an eye-opening opportunity to think about what I might want to do with my career. Sort of foundationally, I spent most of my time drawing construction documents. You know, this was way before the year of AutoCAD. So it was drafting. I mean, we drew and we drew and we drew. Everyone drew all the time because there was no digital production, really. I mean, I think we were doing word processing on computers and that sort of thing. And looking back on that, I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to grow up in the business in an era when drawing was an essential aspect of being able to make a contribution. You know, and I still very much believe that drawing is essential to being your best designer. I think going into the computer, you can get lost in there. And I think, you know, as young landscape architects, I would really encourage your development as hand drawers, finding solutions to design problems. I'll tell you though, learning how to do construction documents is such a fundamental aspect of learning to be a good designer. If you don't know how things go together, it is very hard to design those things. And those things you design, in the end, may not withstand the scrutiny of buildability. So those things are interconnected. I know we like to operate in sort of lofty heights, thinking about grand scales of work, and that's important. And landscape architects, I think, do that better than any other discipline. But on the other end of the spectrum, sort of the detailing, literally the nuts and bolts of landscape architecture is essential. You know, another foundational thing that I learned in this period were studio ethics and behaviors, how to operate. I mean, I was young, I was inexperienced, I didn't have much confidence, and learning how to listen well, how to be respectful, how to offer commentary, but I did it very carefully and lightly for a good many years. In fact, I can remember getting to a point where, you know, I would be in these meetings and someone would offer an idea and everybody said, oh, that's a great idea. Geez, I wish we'd thought of that 30 minutes ago. And 30 minutes ago, I had thought of it, but I was afraid to say it. So don't be afraid to find your voice. Don't be afraid to express yourself. That was an important learning for me in that time. You know, after 3 years of working in this multidisciplinary environment, I wanted to do my own designs. I wanted to see my design ideas built. So I started a design-build business with a colleague of mine, another Conway graduate. So we were 2 Conway graduates, you know, working in Ohio. You know, so it was an opportunity, as I said, to see my design concepts built. It really deepened my understanding of design and construction because we were building these landscapes. It taught me about service to client welfare. I mean, at all levels of the work we do, our clients come first. They're who we serve. They're the ones that pay our bills. And it's fundamental to have sensitivity to the welfare of our clients. And then I also learned that to be excellent was essential. Even if it cost money, you had to find a way to be excellent and never leave a project with a dissatisfied client, but find a way to serve their expectations. You know, these are just, we worked in German Village, which German Village in Columbus, Ohio is a 1 square mile area that was built by German brewers at the start of the 20th century. And it had brick streets, you know, brick, everything was brick. And there was tight, and there were little brick alleys, and these tiny little tight backyards. So the focus of our practice was really German Village. So we got to build all these tight little intimate gardens, you know, and through that we developed a reputation for quality construction, carpentry work, paving, wall building, you know, sophisticated insert carpentry and things like that. So, you know, it was a really exciting time to own my own business, to see it be successful, to be in demand. But after 7 years of doing that, I got tired of the scale. You know, fortunately, I had a partner that wanted to continue working in the practice, so I was able to sell my interest and move on. So I went back to New England. So after selling my business in '85, I went to work for one of my former teacher, Walt, from the Conway School, one of his classmates from Harvard GSD. And when I got there, and they were in the real estate development planning business. So here I'd been working in these tight little urban backyards, and I was hungry for scale. I was hungry to learn about scale and how to operate at scale. So this is why I did that. I mean, it was just like, I need to learn about that. And the only way I could see myself learning about it was, in effect, giving up this thing that I had built and loved to move on. So there are You know, and that's not true for everybody, but there are crisis points where you have to make a decision about, I mean, I could still be sitting in Columbus, Ohio with my feet propped up on my desk running a design build business. But that was a long time ago, and I'm really glad I left it behind. So here I went to New England, I learned to build a new business, you know, I learned a new business. I learned what real estate development was all about, the client types, you know, this is a marked shift in scale. I also learned about public animosity. When you own a design build business, your clients love you generally if you're doing good work, if you're committed to excellence. But in New England, historic New England, when you're saying, well, you know, we're going to take Farmer Brown's 80 acres out there that has been there for the last 250 years, a part of this community, and we're going to put homes on it. Whoo! You know, I mean, everybody shows up at town hall. You know, so I'm thinking, geez, I'm a nice guy, and everybody's really angry at me, you know? And it took me a while to figure out what was going on. So that was a real important learning experience for me. You know, the real estate development business is threatening, particularly in New England, but in many places, because it's going to change your landscape. It's going to change your community and have a number of really significant impacts. So, you know, the firm I joined was in Concord, Massachusetts. And, you know, it was a firm of about 8 or 9 people. And everybody in the firm were graduates of the Harvard Graduate School of Design, including the owner. You know, so I show up, you know, like this hick from Ohio, and everybody's like, okay, who is this guy, you know? He didn't go to Harvard. Why are we even hiring him? Well, partly the reason Ron, the owner of the firm, saw fit to hire me is because he knew that I had built a business and that I had business sensitivity and I knew how to do that. And, you know, 6 months after I was there, I was made vice president and I opened a firm in southern New Hampshire. And I grew the business significantly. So, you know, that was sort of I don't know, it was a good feeling to come in and really be sort of questioned by my colleagues, like, who are you? You didn't go to Harvard. And then to find such success in short order. At the end of my period in New England, one of my clients, because I was building a whole client base in southern New Hampshire, one of my clients offered me a partnership in a project in lieu of fees. So I didn't charge for my efforts. It took 18 months to take his project through the entitlement process. And he was a developer that would he'd buy land, get it entitled, and then sell the land with an entitlement in place, you know, and markedly increasing the value of the land. So, you know, that was a success, but I was also at a point where I was ready for a change. You know, I'd learned the real estate development business to the point where I had clients offering me to be partners. And in fact, the gentleman that offered me a partnership offered me participation in his company. But I just didn't want to commit my life to real estate development. I was glad to know the business. I'd done it enough that I could do it effectively. And I was ready for a change. So, you know, I took the rewards of this partnership and moved to New England. Now, this is some of the work, you know, or types of work that I did when I was in New England. You know, more sort of, you know, the traditional, what I call loops and lollipops kind of development, but also started to explore more urban kinds of settings. You know, I literally have hundreds of, you know, examples of the work I did there, but this is all I'm going to show you, and I'm really not going to focus on it too much, other than to just say I was in the real estate development business and I learned a great deal about it. I also, because, I mean, this is me. And like the way I operate doesn't mean that any of you need to operate in this way, but I was hungry for sort of a new design experience before I ultimately decided to leave New Hampshire. So I started taking advertising design classes, and I loved it. I mean, it was paste up. Well, there was no computers in those days. We were building advertising design boards in the same way landscape architects were building their boards. It was handwork. But I really learned how to size type and to do sort of conceptual design. And I had a company there that started hiring me. So I was doing real estate development and advertising design at the same time. So then I went to New Mexico. And I was only in New Mexico for a year, but you know, I'd never been west, really, and Santa Fe sounded like a great place. I'd never been to Santa Fe, but, you know, I was reading about it. I'm thinking, yeah, I think I'll go to Santa Fe. That sounds really exciting. So I went to Santa Fe, you know, and when I got to Santa Fe, I really spent my first 9 months just touring the American West and, you know, sort of falling in love with the West. And after 9 months of lounging around and not really doing much of anything, I decided to go back to work. So I got a job with a firm called Campbell, Okuma & Perkins. And they were really a very successful and well-regarded firm in New Mexico. Ultimately, Campbell, Okuma & Perkins was purchased by the Design Workshop and integrated into their larger company. But Campbell, Okuma & Perkins invited me because I was 40 years old at that time and I had quite a bit of experience. They invited me to manage a significant new project on the University of New Mexico campus. And Garrett Ekbo, who is the father of you need to know about Garrett Ekbo. I'm not going to give you a lecture on Garrett Ekbo right now, but he was one of 3 people, Garrett Ekbo, James Rose, and Dan Kiley, who are really the fathers of modern landscape architecture. So, and Garrett, when I met him in New Mexico, was 79 years old. You know, he was a prolific designer and author. The thing I really love about Garrett is despite his incredible international acclaim, he was always an advocate for the underclass. He was always looking for ways to apply his landscape architecture trade to the betterment of those who were sort of on the bottom of the economic ladder. And he was long the UC Berkeley department head. He loved to teach. Teaching was important to him. So Garrett and I really found a lot of sort of sympathetic connection in terms of our interests and beliefs. You know, one of the things Garrett said to me, well, there were many sort of wonderful tidbits, but one of them was, you know, you learn to design in the garden. And I thought about that, and I thought, well, geez, I've just been working at scale, and I left the garden behind. But the truth of it is, I really did learn to design in the garden. The garden has a lot of flexibility. It's not bound by a lot of constraints and obligations. So he was right about that. So I'm saying that to you. You know, and in fact, in my design studios, I'm more and more focused on small residential and garden design type projects because I remember what Garrett said to me, and it really stuck, and it mattered. So Garrett and I worked on this University of New Mexico pedestrian mall. It was a fairly sizable project. As I said, he was 79 years old. He came to the university, and there was a big meeting. All the luminaries from the university were there because Garrett had done the master plan for UNM 25 years earlier. So they loved Garrett. And UNM is a beautiful campus, and he had done a remarkable job. So every time there was a significant new project on campus, they would invite Garrett back. So they all came out. Now, I had prepared the site analysis for this pedestrian mall. And, you know, after we had this, you know, sort of meeting of the luminaries, we all walked out on campus, and I had presented the site analysis to the group, including Garrett, and we had all walked out on campus to tour the site. And as we were walking around, Garrett sort of motioned me over, took me aside, and he said, you know, I really appreciate the site analysis you did. That was very thorough. He said, I need you to help me design this. How would you like to come to Berkeley and help me design this project? I'm like, yeah, absolutely. You know, so I went, you know, I went to Berkeley, and Garrett and I sat across this design table for a week designing this project. You know, it was really fascinating. Garrett was a child of the Depression. You know, and, you know, I was sort of like, you know, rip off another piece of trace, rip off. And Garrett would tear off these little teeny pieces of trace paper, and then he'd tear off another one. So I found myself chasing these scraps of trace paper all over the top of the drawing board so that I wouldn't lose any of them, because I had to build this puzzle. I had to go back to New Mexico and build this puzzle of the master plan that he was drawing. But every morning, you know, I'd have 5 sharp HB pencils for him. He always worked in pencil. And he would, I can remember one time I had taped down one of these small pieces of paper, and he was just sort of skipping across the surface, hardly making a mark. And I said, Garrett, what are you doing? He said, I'm searching. And then, poof, he would make this line sort of explode out of this snail trail. You know, it was pretty remarkable, really, to watch this master work. And it was amazing how energetic he was. Like, I was, you know, I was a modernist. Well, no, I really wasn't. Garrett was the modernist. And, you know, he was like, no, we need to blow this apart. So anyway, it was really a remarkable experience for me. His wife would make us lunch, and we'd sit out on their terrace every day, and their terrace looked to the Golden Gate Bridge in downtown San Francisco. It was in Berkeley. They were up in the Berkeley Hills, and we would talk shop. And it was really a remarkable moment in my life. And ultimately, Garrett invited me. He said, you know, you ought to think about coming to San Francisco to work. And, you know, I really wasn't fully committed to whatever I was doing at that moment in time, and was looking for my next chapter. So he connected me with a firm in Oakland, and they hired me, and I moved to the West Coast. Now, this is the Yale Pedestrian Mall in Ariel today. But this is sort of an exaggerated form study I did yesterday, trying to remember the energy that Garrett had towards this design. So, you know, and Garrett, I apologize, I'm sure it isn't really reflective of the truth of what you had envisioned, but nonetheless, there was this sort of energetic explosion that he put forward. All right, so Garrett had invited me to California, so in '89 I headed to California. And when I went there, the firm that I went to work for were experts in parks and sports facility design. And, you know, that was a market I didn't know anything about. I'd been, you know, in the design build business. I'd worked in an interdisciplinary firm, but we didn't really do that kind of work. You know, I'd been in the real estate development business. But the project I did with Garrett in New Mexico was the start of my interest in civic work, in working for community welfare. And working for these guys, parks and sports facilities, was a really important opportunity for me to yet again acquire a new skill. So I've gone through these series of gaining mastery to the point where it didn't really matter to me that much anymore. I'd sort of mastered design build, and I wanted something more. So there were these sort of periods of mastery, and then periods of being a neophyte, of needing to humble myself, because I didn't really know anything about these businesses. So I was willing to do that. I was willing to be a neophyte. And that was particularly true in this case. Now, the partners of this firm were 10 years older than me, and they were very good at what they did. But they were also at an age where they were like, you know, they would rather like ride their bike all day, go on a 100-mile bike ride, or be in one of the partners, he was a thespian. He wanted to act. So they were, you know, they were happy to have me there to run their studio, to learn their business, and bring in work. So I did that. I just brought in work, and I was the studio leader and the studio designer. So I considerably expanded my competencies. I really learned civic design and the public facilitation aspects of community design or civic design. You know, so it was a really important learning experience for me. And I developed, you know, I was an athlete when I was younger, you know, and I love sports. So this was an opportunity for me to learn about something that I really loved and develop a sports facility expertise. You know, and also in this time, I started teaching at UC Berkeley Extension. They have a program for adult learners where you can get a degree and you can sit for registration a couple years later. So it was a very serious undertaking, and there I began to sort of develop my chops, as they say, as a teacher. So, you know, we did a lot of work for UC Berkeley. Like, this is the women's NCAA fast-pitch softball facility. This is the men's NCAA rugby field. You can see here the top of Memorial Stadium. My partner Phil and I actually, you know, also worked on Memorial Stadium, lowered the field by 4 feet, created whole new sideline areas for the teams, and added seating to the stadium. These two fields, you know, occasionally I have the Pac-12 network on my cable. I'll see that field. I mean, I'll turn on, because I like women's fast-pitch softball. And, you know, so, okay, oh, there's my field, you know, and now I built it. This was like 1992 or something when this field was built. So it's holding up. That's one thing. It's great when you have clients who care for the work that you do, right? Who care for it, who actually maintain it, keep it, you know, in good fit. So the one thing we did on these fields, which we had never done before, we'd researched it. It wasn't like just a harebrained idea. But I put forward the idea that, hey, what if we could build these fields dead level? No grade, no water runoff. Could we do that? Because most fields, especially grass fields in those days, had a pitch. They always had a 1.5% pitch. So if you're uphill as an athlete, you have an advantage over those who are downhill and have to run uphill, or, you know, or you're running downhill. So I always felt there was somewhat of a very subtle inequity in the way we graded sports facilities. So I thought, well, what if we could make them dead level? So my partner Phil, who taught grading at Berkeley for many, many years and was really a very knowledgeable sort of construction technologist, we decided to grow this grass on like 3 feet of sand. So we dug out a box 3 feet deep and we put in a very sophisticated subsurface drainage system and seeded grass on it. And the grass roots, I mean, you know, the grass roots are this long. They're not these little stubby things that run into clay. So the field is very stable. And we get heavy rains in Northern California in the winter. And that field just, the water just woof, disappears down into the subsurface drainage. We can go out there after a heavy rain and play on those fields without damaging them. So it was a really remarkable sort of discovery. You know, I did, you know, in Danville, California. This is a 30-acre park, you know, with soccer fields, baseball diamonds, but also more passive recreational uses, play areas, that sort of thing. This was typical of some of the suburban or urban edge projects that Phil and I did. You know, this is Iron Horse Corridor. You know, this is an 18-mile public trail system. You know, this piece of it was a 2-mile stretch that was immediately adjacent to the Pleasant Hill BART. You know, the Bay Area has this Bay Area rapid transit system, and it's considered one of the best in the world. And they had a Bay Area rapid transit stop immediately across the street from this park. So we were connecting at each end to this 18-mile Iron Horse Corridor. You know, back in the early 90s, we did a lot of neighborhood play design. This is in Tracy, California, which is in the Central Valley. And it's hot out there. But the railroads were sort of fundamental to establishing the Central Valley. So we designed this park based on the theme of the railroads. I mean, we even designed sort of a smokestack from an 1850 steam engine that mists cool water down on the kids when they're playing, right, to sort of mimic the smoke of a smokestack. Actually, this is one of the first water-wise demonstration gardens in California. We did that in 1992. And, you know, it was really because of the visionary, the vision of our client, the Parks and Recreation Director in Tracy. You know, even then, we were aware of the water crisis we were dealing with. That was over 30 years ago. And we were aware of it. And we're still aware of it, you know, all these years later. But, you know, I think the problem has grown and remains. Now this, you know, we had just purchased AutoCAD for the first time. We were required to, because we had a project with a client who would hire us, we knew, but we had to produce the construction documents in AutoCAD. So we went out and bought our first AutoCAD. And we had some other, I don't even know what software this was. So, you know, when I had designed this thing, I asked this young colleague, I said, do you think you can model this trellis structure? You know, the trellis was sort of this rounded form. And I said, do you think you could model that in that software? And he said, yeah, I think I can. So in fact, he did. Like, I remember, if we needed this drawing for the next day in the office, when we left that night, we would open it and hope that it was there when we came back the next morning. That was sort of the level of computing power to operate things like this, right? But when we saw this and we went out and saw the finished product, we were like, oh my God, we can envision our designs in ways that we never thought we could. So, you know, we were sold on the idea of modeling our design ideas. And this was the last project that I did for UC Berkeley Sports Department. It was just a gateway design. You know, for me, I was able to do this because I had been taught how to build stuff. I had been taught how to detail things. I had been taught how to envision things at a smaller scale and pull it off. You know, and the university loved this gateway, and it's still there operating all these many years later. But then, you know, sort of in the same time period, and this may explain some of these crazy images I'm throwing at you, but I thought, well, I'll wait, you know, and you'll go, what the heck is what is this, you know? So anyway, I went to the San Francisco Art Institute while I was a studio leader of the firm in Oakland. So, you know, I'd go into work early in the morning, work till mid-afternoon, jump in my car, drive across the Bay Bridge, and go to night classes at the San Francisco Art Institute, you know, until 10 o'clock at night. And I did that every day of the week for 4 years because I was looking for inspiration. My design had become sort of predictable. I was good at it, but I was sort of bored with my own self and the way I approached design. So going to the Art Institute was really sort of fundamental to broadening my creativity, to learning new media, you know, and sort of having unfettered creative freedom. You know, and I was, again, a wide-eyed beginner. I mean, I was surrounded by kids 25 years younger than me who were incredibly talented. I didn't really care because I wasn't there to be an artist. I was there to be a better landscape architect. That's what I cared about. I needed to infuse my work as a landscape architect with new creative moments. You know, and like this stuff, you know, I had a laptop in my office, a 1990s version, that came with a really inexpensive little paint and draw program that I learned I could operate with a mouse. So I started doing all these mouse-drawn landscapes, if you will, just for fun. But it was also a way of breaking down my more traditional way of thinking about landscape. It's like I was sort of blowing landscape apart, at least, you know, figuratively. And so it was a really fun and exciting time for me. I mean, the San Francisco Arts Institute is this wonderful Italianate structure. It's been there for many, many years. You know, it's adjacent to Coit Tower and Russian Hill. Diego Rivera, that's Diego, this is a wall mural in the gallery of the San Francisco Art Institute. Diego taught there. Frida Kahlo was a part of the program. And there were Mark Rothko, Ansel Adams. You know, this was a storied art institute. So I didn't even know. I just sort of walked in and discovered these things as I was there. So I was, you know, I was really inspired, even at the age of 40, by being in this environment. So, I mean, you know, like it made going to work in the morning so much more fun. I'm like, okay, I'm going in at 6, and I'm going to work till 3. And then I get to go to the Art Institute, you know? So it sort of made the 6 to 3 feel a little better. There was always this anticipation of going and rubbing shoulders with all of these artists. You know, then I was really loving being a student again, you know, going to the Art Institute for those years. So UC Berkeley started a brand new Masters of Urban Design program. And I'd heard about it, and I thought, well, you know, maybe Berkeley will accept me. So I put in my application and was accepted into the first cohort of the urban design program. There were only 4 of us, and there were like 12 faculty members. Right? They had assembled, you know, sort of the best faculty members from the architecture program, the city and regional planning program, and the landscape architecture program to teach us. So I was sort of surrounded by really talented people, you know, like Alan Jackson and Linda Jewell and Dan Solomon and Peter Calthorpe and, you know, name people, you know, and I was sort of still feeling a little bit like a country bumpkin from Ohio. And I'm like, what the heck am I doing here, you know? But it was a wonderful time for me to learn about streets and downtowns. You know, I was there at the birth of new urbanism. Dan Solomon and Peter Calthorpe were members of the Charter for New Urbanism, and they were selling it. And we were, you know, we were the buyers of new urbanism. So, you know, I'm so glad that I was there at that sort of moment when I was a part of the birth of a new way of thinking about urban design. I felt very fortunate in that way. I ended up getting to go to Tuscany for a month to work on an urban design project for a Tuscan hill town. And also, my thesis led to a 15-year consultancy. So I discovered a city that really needed something I was offering in my thesis. And then we got to like one another, and for the next 15 years, they called on me to do a variety of urban design work for them. This is Alan Jacobs. He was my thesis chair. Jake is a renowned urban designer. He's 95. He's still alive. He's 95 years old and going strong. I mean, he's a curmudgeon, you know. Jake... they like to say, Jake does not suffer fools lightly. You know, so I was always very careful around Jake because I saw him chew out a lot of people. But he was the planning director in San Francisco for over 20 years. And he shaped, you know, from before the Transamerica building, he shaped that iconic skyline of San Francisco, which I'm sure he's really angry about, which has been destroyed by new high-rise towers that are off on the edge, which he would not allow. I mean, he would have died rather than let that happen. But, you know, Berkeley hired him away, and, you know, the vision got lost. And it shows you how fragile a vision can be, even from a powerful person like Jake. So anyway, he was my thesis chair, and I remember my first day of class, I walked in, and Jake came over to me and said, you're a landscape, I was the only landscape architect in the program. Urban design is more the realm of architecture, but I was the only landscape architect. And Jake walked up to me, he goes, you're a landscape architect. I said, yeah. He said, I'm going to make a street designer out of you. I'm like, okay, I didn't even know what I was there to do, but at that moment I realized Jake was going to make a street designer out of me. You know, and you may know this book, but if you don't, you ought to, because it's a remarkable piece of work on streets throughout the world. All right, so I graduated from Berkeley and began my career in streets and plaza work, which is primarily, you know, the focus of the work that I did. You know, this was a profound shift in my professional focus. Again, I'm like, well, I was really getting the hang of that parks and recreation stuff, And now, what do I know about urban design? I really don't know much about urban design. Even though I just graduated from Berkeley, that doesn't mean I know very much. So, you know, it was sort of humbling, like, how do I figure this out? But I actually joined forces with my former partner, Phil, who we had done, you know, the rec and open space and sports facility things together. Because I knew that if I was going to build streets, I needed someone like Phil to help me do it. Like his technical construction technology expertise. Because when you open up an old Main Street, because that was the business we were in, revitalizing downtowns. And when you peel back, I mean, there's so much going on. I mean, there are like old coal bins down there. I mean, I remember a guy was busting concrete one day and his hammer went right through the ground down into an old coal bin that he had broken through to. So there is stuff that's going on in there that nobody knows about. So, you know, it makes that kind of work really complicated. But, I came to do work that was really very satisfying, like the redevelopment of city centers. You know, streets that transform blight. I mean, my clients were redevelopment agencies. And redevelopment agencies are basically the state they're in the state of California in this case, they allow redevelopment agencies to, in effect, collect 90% of the tax that would go to the state, real estate tax that would go to the state. And they accumulate this 90% tax into a huge fund. So, you know, they might have a blighted downtown, but they also had the money to fix it. So it was a really good situation to be in for a young urban designer. You know, so, and also when you're revitalizing downtowns, like everybody, it matters to everybody. So, you know, conducting charrettes, developing my facilitation skills were critical to that work. You need community support and buy-in. I mean, we would go to Main Street where, you know, there were empty storefronts. You know, they'd lost out to Home Depot and Walmart and all these urban edge retailers. I mean, the bike shop guy, I mean, he paid more for his bike wholesale than Walmart was selling at retail. How are you going to compete with that? You're going to be out of business pretty soon. So we would take over these storefronts and build a studio in there. And we'd get the engineers there and the architects there and everybody that was on the team to revitalize these downtowns. You know, and people, the mayor would come, the council members, decision makers in the community, but homeless people would wander in. We always had coffee and donuts. And, you know, we had a young associate. Well, like as the trace paper came out, Todd would like this. As the trace paper came out, we were just pasting the walls with it, right? And we'd have a young associate up there trying to explain to anybody that wanted to know what was going on, what the images meant. So, you know, and if a homeless person wandered in, we'd tell them to and give them coffee and donuts. And it was sort of a wonderful, holistic kind of caring for the community. Another aspect of this time for me was improved neighborhood design, and I'll show you that in a moment. But really what that meant was because I had learned the real estate development business in New England, communities in California would hire me to, like, projects that were in the entitlement process. And most of the time they were these loops and lollipop, cul-de-sac projects we'd been building since World War II. And they had new community design. New urbanism was starting to take over. New urbanism was the coin of the realm in civic design. So they had new general plans that said, well, no, you cannot do that here anymore. So they would have the real estate developer pay them to pay me. I didn't want to work for the developers. I wanted to work for the city and have that linkage back to the community. Like, I wanted the community to know that I was on their side. I'm not working for these guys. I'm working for you. So they would pay the city to pay me to redesign their projects, which was a great sort of circular activity. You know, it's like, And you know, the thing though, because I'd been in the real estate development business, I understood how important yield was to developers. I mean, it's all about money. Like, what is the yield? How many lineal feet of road? I knew these sort of criteria that were always important to them. So I would often achieve, I would certainly meet their yield, but I would also exceed it. And so I became sort of popular with them too. So it was a win-win scenario. And I'll show you some of that work as we move on. So, you know, this is a downtown. Actually, Livermore, California is, my property is up in the mountains above Livermore, California. But Livermore, this street, you know, was blighted. It had empty storefronts. There were no trees. I mean, it's 110 degrees in the summer on this street. Even if there was a store you wanted to go to, you wouldn't want to walk down it. You know, so, you know, this was sort of the first of the major street revitalization projects that I had an opportunity to work on. Now, and you'll see some really beautiful perspective sketches. I realized early that I was going to pay, or have my client pay, for professional rendering. And I didn't want this, you know, the digital stuff, which was starting to come online there. I wanted beautiful, handcrafted, warm kinds of imagery, which really speaks to all of us. So, you know, we did a lot of that. But like, this was the first time we plant street. Now, we can't do this in Utah because the snowplow wouldn't like it. But in California, it doesn't snow. So we plant trees actually in the parking lane. Now, we lose some parking efficiency by virtue of that. But the parking lane now, look at how shady it is. The parking lane, like an adjacent restaurateur, can come and lease that space from the city and put tables and chairs out there. And rather than, I don't have a picture of it here, rather than a traditional 6-inch curb, we made 8-inch curbs, and we split them into two 4-inch, like 15-inch treads. So it was a comfortable, safe sort of walk down to the parking lane where there would be restaurant tables and other things, or the potential for it. This was the first project we used Cornell University structural soil on. And you know, maybe some of you know about Cornell University structural soil, but it was a brand new product in those days, and it was patented. So we put, you know, like a 10 by 10, 3-foot deep structural soil under the pavement before we poured it, you know, centered on where we knew the tree was going to be. And then, you know, we planted like little 1.5-inch trees in this stuff. And I remember at the end of the first year, they were like 4.5-inch caliper, and the trunks were starting to crack. And I'm like, oh my God, slow down, you know? And they were just starting to canopy up and over everything. Finally, they did slow down, and the trees, but it was remarkable. I mean, landscape architect, we have a long history of suffering urban trees. I mean, this has been a problem in our discipline for a long, long time. So this was a remarkable contribution to the design of urban environments where pavement is everywhere. So this was, you know, the first of those street projects. You know, this was another one, Cinema Streetscape in Redwood City, California. These are Phoenix canariensis, Canary Island date palms. Those trees, this project was done in 2005. I had to go all over the desert of Southern California to hand select these things and try and get them matched in height. And they have these massive sort of elephant leg trunks to them. But in 2005, which is almost 20 years ago, each one of those trees cost $15,000 each. And you could only move one of them at a time on a flatbed semi. That's part of the cost. But, you know, this was a redevelopment project. This was an area that was blighted. They had the financial resources to do it. So, you know, anyway, you know, more of those renderings. This is Courthouse Square, also in Redwood City, and we continued the palm treatment associated with that we'd done on the streets. You know, we designed this new house, you know, and this sort of medallion, you know, and we had, you know, really talented architects working on the team, you know, just a whole collection of design disciplines. One of the design disciplines, I was really concerned, like those are two different colors of concrete in that medallion. And I'm like, oh man, if this thing starts cracking, like that beautiful idea is going to be lost. How are we going to prevent this from cracking? And so I found this civil engineer whose really, his primary professional focus was concrete mix design. I'm like, you make a career out of that? Oh yeah, there's all kinds of people that need special concrete mix designs. Airports, you know, he rattled off all these things. And I showed him this design. I said, well, can you help me detail this and develop a concrete mix design that isn't going to crack? And he said, oh yeah, we can do that. And now, I mean, it's like, you know, 20 years later, there's not a crack in that. I mean, you can see, you know, sort of in this image, some of the delicacy and the, you know, interplay of concrete colors and typology. So anyway, you learn things all the way along. You know, I thought, well, we're going to abandon this idea because it's going to, I had these, I'd wake up in the middle of the night, like, oh, that's going to fall apart. But it didn't, because I found somebody who knew a lot more than I did about it. And that's always important. You got to know what you don't know. You know, this is a project actually for the community that I did my thesis on. And this was sort of part of my 15-year consultancy with them. This is a waterfront specific plan. And in California, a specific plan becomes law. It's an attachment to the city's general plan. So it is empowered by law. So we did this specific plan, and it was a form-based code. It was the first time I'd ever done a form-based code. And a form-based code means that, you know, like these are all the same. Like here's the existing condition. Well, you could do this, or even you could do this, or you could do this, because they all respect the form. And it also has to do with architecture, height, setback. You know, it's a very complicated code. You know, this was a street in East Los Angeles, Montebello, California. And East LA is sort of an underserved area, you know, of Los Angeles. So now these trees are Phoenix dactylifera, and they're the date palms that we harvest dates from. And I thought, oh geez, I got to go back down in the desert and go pick, you know, I think there were 120 of these on this street because it ran for a long distance. I thought, oh my God, you know, I'm going to spend all this time in the desert. Well, so I met this guy at an actual date orchard. And they were identical clones as far as the eye could see. I'm like, well, I'll take 110 of those. And I got back in my car and drove to the airport. So, you know, it wasn't like the Phoenix canariensis, which were much harder to find. So, you know, all of these streets really brought a new identity and brand and enthusiasm to the community. I mean, it's remarkable. The transformation culturally in relationship to this work that revitalizes the places that they live. This was another project. Yuba City, California is up in the northern Central Valley, and you know, it's 110 degrees in the summer too. So we used engineered soil again for this entire street. I don't know if you can even see how, like when the trees were smaller, you know, there's like a 10 by 10, 3 foot deep structural soil aggregate base. And we would plant those trees and pour the pavement right on it, and it serves both purposes. It has the structural integrity to carry the load of the pavement in the cars, but it also has the growing medium capacity to make these trees shoot out of the ground and canopy over the street in a very short amount of time. You know, and we did just studies. International Boulevard runs through East Oakland, and East Oakland is a sort of an underclass environment that is really dependent on transit. So we envisioned ways to enrich that experience through street redesign, through transit plaza development, you know, and it was just a planning document. But slowly, others will follow behind us and build out some of these features. So there's real power in this work as well. Now, this was the work I was talking about, where a real estate developer would pay the city to pay me to redesign their projects. And these are some examples of that. You know, and I would look for locating parks and open space within a quarter-mile walking distance. You know, I would look for opportunities to create, you know, loops or connections, trail system connections through the sites. You know, an equitable distribution of park sites, preservation of organic environmental areas. And I also did, a part of this work was for me to create street typologies for these new developments. You know, there would be a hierarchy of street typologies associated with these. All right, so here I am at USU LAEP. And I'm probably getting near the end here. I'll move on quickly. So teaching, you know, really what I brought practice to the classroom. I'm not the only one, but that's been sort of the focus of my time here at USU. And I have all these anecdotal stories, right? I'm like, well, let me tell you this. And that has a way of embedding the importance of ideas when you can tie it to an actual experience. So that's been part of the contribution I make, and also my love. You know, my hand graphics and form giving aspects are also an important contribution I make. You know, I've taught site planning and design for a number of years, and I love doing that, and it's something that matters to me, so my heart is in that. I mean, I used to teach detailing and construction documents, and I may do that again. I'm looking at Keith in that regard. I may do that again. You know, and then community engaged learning, I learned about that, you know, 50 years earlier at the Conway School. So, you know, that's something that's very sort of akin to my education and professional work. And then I'm also an extension specialist and have enjoyed, you know, getting to know the community and doing various projects out in the community as a USU extension specialist. So now I'm going to finish with Morpholio. And this goes back to hand graphics and form giving, right? So one of our alumni, Brian Huckaluck, introduced me to Morpholio, I think like in 2014 or something like that. And I was like, oh man, you mean you can do, so I talked Keith into buying me, or maybe it was Sean at that time, buying me a laptop and an Apple Pencil, and I began to learn it. You know, so it was linked. Like a lot of the images that you've seen through this show were drawn with a mouse in 1990 on a big old clunky laptop. But it was really like seeing that. I ran into it when I was looking for all my work. I thought, wow, I've had a long interest I didn't even realize in drawing digitally. I mean, it was hard to do with a mouse, but now I had, you know, the power of modern technology. You know, I think it's a very effective contemporary tool. And I think, honestly, we leave drawing behind far too often. You know, you guys are so required to learn so many softwares. Your drawing skills sort of go begging after a while. And those drawing skills of like the confidence to pick up a pencil and make a mark is really what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about drawing construction documents by hand. Lord, no. You know, we want to do that in AutoCAD. You know, and I mean the things Photoshop will do and Lumia and all these other things, you know. But I'm talking about design. Like design. That's where that matters. Being able to draw, having the confidence to make a mark and have a conversation with a pencil or a pen. You know, and Morpholio is so much more forgiving than Trace. Those of you that use it know the truth of that. You know, it's like undo, undo. Okay, good, I'm back to where I was. Had I made those marks on Trace paper, I'm like, and I'm starting over again, you know. So it's incredible. You know, and there is this, I like to say this in the graphics class, there is a wheelbarrow full of tools in this little software. And I do think it is the gateway to digital design. In other words, I'm going to show you some of the professional work I've been doing, and it is a gateway. It's a way of linking to the digital workflow. I mean, you have to have a way of linking to it. And if you can actually draw digitally and send that to a colleague who can open it in Photoshop, because I can send Photoshop documents out of Morpholio. All the layers that I use, I can just send those right on down the line, and those can become part of a digital production environment. All right. So, you know, learning Morpholio. So Huck introduced me to Morpholio, and I'm like, okay. You know, in the summers, I should have been working on my house, but I was actually sitting in the living room trying to learn how to draw in Morpholio. And, you know, just like, okay, what would this tool do? And what would that tool do? And like the incredible color palettes, all these color palettes. You know, so I was just experimenting, you know, with sort of landscape, sort of like I had when I had that mouse in my hand. But now I had a little bit more control. So I'm just experimenting, or plan view. Like these are all watercolor, and that's why they look so diffuse. But I thought, oh, that's a cool effect. Maybe I can use that at some point down the line. So I'm teaching myself the tool by playing. It's like being a child again. When I had that mouse in my hand, I used to think that I was like in the first grade again, with a pencil that was too big for my hand. But I was loving it, and everything I did was fantastic, just like a 6-year-old, you know? And it was sort of true for me in terms of the use of Morpholio as well. You know, so so these are just some examples of what I did to learn how to draw in Morpholio and learned the capabilities that it offered. So in terms of my teaching, I started using Morpholio. Really, it seemed like a good tool to me to do, you know, context and site analysis work, right? And sort of teaching students how to think contextually from sort of a large scale and work their way down to site. The same with this, really. It's just context and site analysis. You know, working your way down into the site. Same here, right? I mean, that image on the left, you know, it goes from Salt Lake City to Jackson, right? So, I was also sort of making the point about, well, don't be afraid to think big and work your way down. See what you discover at that scale, what can you discover at this scale, and then what can you discover at the site scale. You know, another thing I love about Morpholio, and I just threw this in so I could make this point, is the ability to manage color. Like, you know, I can start, like, I colored this image this way, and I thought, well, you know, that's making a name for itself, so to speak, or was really sort of bold. But I thought, well, I can, you know, just by moving a dial, I can push the color back. So I love the incredible, like if you were doing that on trace paper and you laid down that color and you didn't like it, well, that's tough. That's just too bad because there's nothing you can do about it. I mean, I suppose you could, and you're saying, oh no, I could scan it and take it into Photoshop, and and yeah, I guess you could. But so anyway, I just love that. You know, so I also started using Morpholio as a teaching tool just to talk about, you know, concept diagrams. You know, in their many forms. Here I am again working in the garden, right? This is Garrett in my ear saying, oh, not only do you learn to design in the garden, you should be teaching design in the garden. And I'm working with sophomores and early career people, so this is a good time to be hauling those sorts of ideas out, right? Learn to design in the garden. You know, and I also use it sometimes to just talk about the principles of perspective and how perspective works without being too precious about it. You know, these kinds of things that students need to understand, right? So, I mean, I don't do a lot of finished perspective. I don't have the patience for it. I'd rather hire somebody to do it for me. Carolyn, I'll hire you to do it for me. You know, and then now my professional practice. So I'm working part-time with a firm in Salt Lake. And, you know, here's some of the concept diagram work, but applied to professional practice. I mean, you know, that's a mile of parkway in Hawaii. You know, here's a golf complex and clubhouse. You know, the power of the diagram, and this is the power of the diagram, I'm saying it, is very real. So get mastery of that. Know that. Be good at that. You know, but I also, I mean, honestly, this was the first time, and I know this may sound nuts, this is the first time I'd ever really done a sort of rendered schematic in Morpholio. I mean, I'd been drawing in it for 3 or 4 years, but they said, hey, could you sort of take this area and create a sense of gateway and arrival into this mixed-use development community? So, you know, I did a sketch, and the studio director liked it, and I just converted it really quickly. I mean, it's unbelievable how, you know, and then this can go on down the line and be a part of the digital workflow. You know, as landscape architects, we do a lot of sort of everyday stuff. Like, not everything is an award-winning project. Sometimes we have to solve sort of simple vehicular access and look at different alternatives. And then, you know, apply those alternatives to a larger area. And parking, you know, we got to know parking. We got to be good at parking. I mean, that's not sexy, but it needs to be done well. It needs to be done well. Now, this is a project that I did professionally. This sketch over here was done by one of my former students who was the project manager of this project. And she did this quick sketch at scale. This is a piece of trace paper taped down to an underlying at-scale print of part of the site. And she asked me if I could scan that in and bring it into Morpholio and render it. So from that, I produced this image and then put a color layer underneath. That's the other beautiful thing. You can just put a color layer under these things. If you don't like it, you just, okay, I'm going to put another one under there. You know, it's not like applying ink to the surface and then you can't recover from it. But yeah, McKenna Montgomery, you know, my colleague and friend, did this sketch, and I helped her transform that into a product that is client-worthy and ready for discussion. You know, like this is another thing, you know, like just there are these different pre-designed housing typologies and different lot configurations at a big project that we're doing. And, you know, so I showed them how to fit these lots on these big homes on these small lots. You know, affordable housing project in Hawaii, just looking at different alternatives. So the owners, the real estate developers could go, well, you know, I don't think we want that much, but this feels right. You know, so, you know, here's a concept diagram that ultimately became a schematic. So these early iterative ideas can get translated into a schematic quickly. You know, here's a site design, you know, for multifamily housing, a retail core, that sort of thing. One of the things I love about Morpholio is I can set the widths of my pens, and you know, if I know the measured width of the right-of-way for the streets, I just set my pen to that width and I strike it down, and then the next layer I put on this, I can just copy the edges of the marker line I put down, and I'll know I'm at the right scale. You know, just little studies of, you know, pool and clubhouse complex. I mean, I work for a real estate developer, so this is kind of the work that I'm doing right now. Like, here's a Morpholio sketch that I gave to a colleague who translated it into Photoshop. So this issue of being engaged in digital workflow is evident in that. Detailing. We don't do enough of it around here, in my opinion, and it's really important. So I'll just say that. And Morpholio is a wonderful tool to do sort of, you know, image making. I'm not sure I'd draw construction details in Morpholio, but I can surely consider different designs. You know, cross sections. You know, Morpholio is a wonderful little tool for that. You know, sort of character studies, different wall types and feel and planting design character. And, you know, other sections that show fencing and fence transitions. All right, so that's what I got. So.